bad is the global plastics problem? What is greenwashing, and how can consumers discern this from what they see or read in ads and media? And what are the real solutions to the plastics crisis? Hello, everyone, and welcome to our seventh episode of the YTL podcast, Yung Totoo Lang, our 25th on 103.1 Edge Radio in Laguna. I'm your host, Tarra Quismundo. I'm a journalist from the Philippines. Thanks for joining us in this show that wages a battle against fake news and disinformation. This is a very special episode, everyone, because today we have a panel of guests from environment groups that have been very active in the campaign to address the plastics crisis. In October 2019, I had the privilege of taking part in a fellowship hosted by the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives and Break Free from Plastics in Penang, Malaysia. And there I learned how bad the plastics problem is. Some of the other fellows will be joining us today, so perhaps later they could pose questions and chime in the discussion. Of course, plastic packaging, plastic things, they're part of our daily life, from shampoo sachets and bottles, bubble wrap that come with our online shopping deliveries, to plastic packaging that come with our food deliveries, especially over this pandemic lockdown. Plastic is everywhere, and most of them are single use. This means they are no longer recycled and they go straight to the trash pile. Just as a preface for our conversation, I want to give you a picture of how much plastic there is on Earth. And mind you, they do not decompose, at least not in our lifetime. According to studies, it takes from 200 years to 1,000 years for plastic to decompose. In 2015, 322 million tons of plastic was produced. This is a 20-fold increase from the 1960s. And at the current rate of plastic production, this figure is forecast to double by 2035 and quadruple by 2050. Our cumulative plastic output by the same year will have reached 26 billion tons, according to a 2017 study by the Center for International Environmental Law. Here in the Philippines, the plastics problem is apparent in the single use sachets that we see cluttering our streets and roads, garbage bins, rivers, sewers. We have sachets of shampoo, conditioner, even toothpaste, facial wash, plastic bags we use in public markets. So, why are we talking about this on the YTL podcast? We're a show about fake news and disinformation, and where does the plastics crisis and disinformation intersect? This is where greenwashing comes in. Greenwashing, according to BFFP, is a way in which major companies and organizations spread information on business practices that aims to build a public image that they are environmentally responsible. In other words, they make it appear that their business practices are environmentally sound, even while their claims appear to be misleading. For context, there has been a debate on what or who drives plastic production in the consumer economy. For instance, in the Philippines, sachets are what consumers in poor communities could afford to purchase day to day as they need them. We call this the tingi economy. But what if corporations could design better and greener packaging options in the face of such reality? So today we have experts here to take us to a deep dive into this issue and give actual solutions to the plastics problem. Please join us in the next hour and a half of this discussion, and I hope you can take down some notes, because each of us has the ability and the responsibility to cut down on our plastics use. So enough of me talking. On to our expert panel today. Our first guest developed his interest in waste management issues because of a catastrophic landfill avalanche near his hometown in Bandung, Indonesia. The incident happened in February 21, 2005, where 143 people were killed and 71 houses were buried. This ignited his passion in pursuing efforts on how to achieve a zero waste society. He has been working for years in this advocacy, and currently he is Climate and Clean Energy Campaign Associate for GAIA Asia Pacific. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Yobel Novian Putra. Welcome,
Hello,
Yobel.
everyone. Hello, Tara. Nice to meet you all.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for joining
Great.
us today. It's nice to see you. Okay, our next guest is a longtime and multi awarded environmental activist in the Philippines who has been campaigning on waste and toxic pollution for over 25 years. He has worked in environmental groups in various capacities and has earned global recognition for his efforts, including the Goldman Environmental Prize in 2003 for efforts that led to the first national ban on waste incineration, which was in the Philippines, of course. And in 2017, he was named as one of Time magazine's heroes for the environment. Ladies and gentlemen, the pride of Inang Kalikasan, Von Hernandez. Welcome, Sir Von.
Thank you, Tara. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to be
Thank
here.
you so much. Yeah. So first, let's go in depth about greenwashing, and perhaps both of you can, respond and talk about the situation in the Philippines, Indonesia, and the bigger picture, of course, regionally and globally. When did this trend begin?
Greenwashing, in general, has been around since environmental issues have occupied the public spotlight. Right?
Oh.
It's sort of like a knee-jerk response, I would say, on the part of those who perpetrate the destruction of the environment to show that they are doing something about the problem, right? But as we've seen from trends, even in the past, many companies make false claims to show that they are doing something, but without necessarily altering, for example, the core business. And the impact on the environment is still continuing or still the same of their operations, that is. So it's been around, and in the case of plastics, we've seen and documented numerous attempts, both by the fossil fuel industry, which is like the mother industry of the plastics industry, and also by consumer goods companies who use disposable or throwaway packaging to deliver their products to market. And we can talk more about those examples later.
Over the years, have you seen a rise in this, or are they like putting it to the surface more?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, because especially now when the issue of plastic pollution and climate change are top of mind, when
Oh,
you
yeah.
ask around and all over the world, right? Environmental issues have become, I mean, compared to, let's say, 20 years ago, there is now more prominence. Environmental issues enjoy more prominence, and therefore there's also increasing awareness, public awareness on the issue. And with increasing awareness comes a lot of questions, right? So, for example, many the companies that we have named as top polluters or top plastic polluters through our brand audits in Breakthrough from Plastic
Yeah.
have been issuing statements, almost parroting our general positions. Like this company, can I name companies? Yes, Coke, for example, talks about a world without waste, or Unilever talks about its zero waste program. These are catchphrases, that originated from civil society. And when I talk about previous examples, even the concept of sustainable development, as you know, has been appropriated or probably misappropriated
Yeah.
to justify destructive operations or business as usual on the part of these companies. The devil, of course, in the details. What they mean, when they use these phrases or when they use these programs, or when they use these claims to describe their programs, and then you'll see that really it's more of the same, and the changes being promoted are really superficial.
Maybe I can ask Yobel this. Yobel, on greenwashing, based on like what Juan was saying about like the superficial efforts, is it a lack of sincerity or lack of capability that's behind this? I don't know, maybe they really want to actually avoid plastics, but they just don't have the capability. What do you think is the reason behind this trend, that why do they have to greenwash while there's a lot of talk about this because of the climate change issue and the role of plastics in that problem?
I think it's because they earn billions and billions, even trillions of dollars every year. Looking at how things change, for example, these companies are not doing this greenwashing alone or per company, but they are making an alliances. In fact, they call alliance to end plastic waste, which is very PR-ish, terminology. They want to end plastic waste, but they are the one that produce that problematic waste. And in fact, looking at the condition in Asian country or developing countries, if you see the projection of plastic production, it will quadruple in the next 40 years.
Yeah.
And they don't have intention to stop about it. But the worst case for us is that they are aiming the market in developing countries like Africa, Asia. So we are the market. So for them, it's a really big risk and gamble to stop producing plastic in their packaging products. So I think the problem here is they have this problematic business model where they externalize every cost possible, not only at the end of pipe, which is waste management, but also the impact they generate even before the plastic is produced and manufactured as packaging. So that's how I perceive it, because we are the market, and business, especially big ones, don't want to lose the market, especially when they earn billions and trillions. So this is a strategy, a tactic to make the customer retain in their system, to make sure the money keep flowing for the next decades.
Because I've during my research for this episode, I've seen major companies, they have on their websites press releases. It's very prominent. They're saying that one is they're producing packaging that's made of completely recycled material, from bottles and cans to caps and labels. And then there's another global company that pledged to cut down on use of virgin plastic, or first use plastic made from chemicals sourced from fossil fuels. And their pledge is to remove 100,000 tons of plastic from their production cycle by 2025. Why is this unbelievable? Basically, why is this incredible?
Well, first of all, when it comes to claims of recycling targets, these companies, the same companies, have been pledging or have been committing to, for example, increase the recycled content in their packaging, and have been failing again and again, right? So, for example, let me cite some statistics. For example, Nestle said that they will increase their recycled content in their plastic packaging to 25% by 2025. But the report last year shows that they've only managed to maybe meet the target 3%. So, and then they have to reset their targets again. And same with the other polluters like Pepsi and Coke. Every now and then they come up with new targets and consistently failing to meet those targets. So it's very difficult to believe these claims. And looking at it from an industry-wide perspective, since the advent of plastics production in the 50s, the studies have shown that less than 10% of all the plastics ever deployed or into the market have actually been recycled, right? Less than 10%, and that is you can say a 70-year track record of industry.
Wow.
So it doesn't inspire much confidence to believe these new claims that they would do better. In fact, probably one of the biggest greenwashing scams ever foisted on the public by the plastics industry is the claim of recycling, right? That everything could be recycled, and that's the reason why there's so much dependency on plastics, including disposable or single-use plastics, which we know in reality are not properly recycled, not even collected properly to begin with, right? So many of the stuff that the companies, for example, the sachets and the multi-layered plastics that they are putting out in the market to deliver their products could not be managed. You know, when Unilever talks about zero waste to landfills, for example, that means only that they will make sure that the stuff doesn't end up in dump sites or landfills, but probably will end up in a cement kiln or an incinerator
Oh.
as part of. There's a new program, for example, here in the Philippines, they call it plastic neutrality, which is for me kind of greenwashing because it tries to distract public. It tries to confuse the public what plastic neutrality means. And Nestle claims that they've already achieved plastic neutrality. That means capturing what they're putting out in the market, but really the sachets and the disposable plastics collected are sent to cement kiln to pollute another community, right? It's burned as
Oh.
fuel in cement kilns, or and that is a questionable practice. Also, not just because of toxic emissions associated with that process, but also the greenhouse or carbon emissions from burning all these plastics in cement kilns. And then they have the gall to claim plastic neutral. So this is one of those new things, you know, being floated out there by companies. Another example of greenwashing, if you ask me.
I'll go back to that point, but I want to drill down into your what the failure of them to keep promises. They keep making promises, but they fail. Is the failure a matter of will, or again, is it a matter of capacity?
Well, it's both, right? Because they currently the infrastructure or the business model, shall we say, that they're using is so addicted to the use of single-use plastics, right? Because they wanted to target the poor sectors of the
Mhm.
market.
Mhm.
And so they've appropriated what you called earlier as the thingy culture that was quite
Yeah.
prevalent in many Asian countries. They've appropriated that and in place of reusable containers, which we used to have, right? Whenever you go to sari sari store or a community store, you bring your own reusable container. But so they somebody had the bright idea of sachets, of course convenient, but not thinking about the consequences and what it means, you know, because as we are proving in many of our communities practicing zero waste in Asia and many other places, the
Yeah.
residual component of the waste almost always is made up of sachets. And who shoulders the cost or the burden for managing this? As Yobel mentioned, the externalities, they're shouldered by consumers, by tax-paying citizens who end up footing the bill for having the waste collected and sent to a landfill or a dump site or burned in an incinerator or a cement kiln. And it's not even a solution, right? Because you end up merely transferring pollution from one place to another.
One place to another. I want to go back to what Yobel mentioned earlier. Yobel, you mentioned that they're earning billions, especially from markets in Asia and Africa. Can you tell us it like give us a picture on why they are thriving in these markets, these major companies, and why they are still using plastic packaging?
First of all, the business model is centralistic, meaning that they build or manufacture in one place and they need to distribute it or transport it in a long distance. So that's where the packaging play a role. And combine that with our specific condition in developing country, which means we don't really have that good access for transportation or
Mm,
even the basic logistic system. It's really difficult to distribute this unless you package it with some kind of material. In this case, it's plastic. But when we look at the specific context of developing country, people don't have that capacity to buy in bulk because the low income situation. But that's the argument that the industry make. to justify their production of small packaging, like sachet in this case. So if we look back at how our ancient ways or our local wisdom in how we produce and consume, we actually have that in our identity, on how to take what we need, not take what they market or they, sell on the internet. So this kind of cultural shift is intentional. They say that this is a demand problem. Like the market is demanding for it. Let's take back like maybe 50 years ago when my grandma is not really thinking much about what does the packaging look like, what color is it, or what shape it takes. He only like take a basket or anything or any container at the home, bring it to the market, the wet market, fill it, go back, no waste. But suddenly the industry introduced this idea of, hey, we have this brilliant looking sachet, it's safe for the food and everything. So it shifted the culture intentionally and make the market seems to demand for that. But that's not the case. It's an engineered marketing system embedded in our culture by the industry.
Hmm. I mean, I think now one of the factors on how consumers decide which one they buy, like there's like so many shampoo brands, right? And then they pick like, ah, this looks really nice, and it says like how many vitamins and whatever, organic on the product that's on the packaging. And yeah, it makes a lot of sense, like color also matters now, and now they look, so it has really become like a marketing tool. So these are their key markets now, like you mentioned, Africa and Asia, and the how you say, the small amount that people can buy, but their argument is that that's what they need, and then we're catering to that, but you're saying that it's the other way around. I just want to go to the point where, just so our listeners actually understand just how toxic plastic is. Yobel, can you talk about like the hazards that plastic can pose, like in communities when they're just strewn on the streets or the rivers, and what does it mean to humans, and even the fishes and in marine life?
So first of all, we need to understand that plastic is a man-made substance that has lots of chemical, which we don't know at all. We only know that 7 codes with good triangle, on the packaging like PET,
Oh yeah,
HDPE.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But when you look at number 7, it says others with the S.
Yeah.
And if you look at the chemical, material of plastic, there are thousands of it. For example, the classic example is polycarbonate or PC. Maybe you have seen that. It has some really bad additives used to mold and shape that plastic in such a way that make it durable or maybe colorful, and it could leach to your food. And the thing is, it's not like influenza or fever that you can see the symptoms right away. It accumulates, it bioaccumulates in your body. And if you're a woman and you have a child, it might be transferred to your fetus and to your child. And then the next generation will suffer from that. So this cumulative effect is really hard to understand because I understand people have short-term vision. Even you can forget what you planned for today, right? So maybe if you talk about, hey, this plastic have a multi-generational effect, people tend to having hard time to understand that. So that's the first thing, especially for food contact material and sorry, plastic contact material. And the other is on when they are treated this ways by burning it. Like Fon said, some people are burning it in cement kiln, meaning that it will release a big carbon dioxide. And now we are in an existential crisis. Like 10 years from now, scientists have told us that this is a huge, big time for us to make a good decision. And also, if you see at the data, actually we have this 2 degree Celsius target, right, for the
Yes.
climate.
Yes. Mm.
And 1/3 of that is contributed by plastic production and consumption. So this is a
Mm.
huge news. We need to do something, 1/3 of it. So aside from the carbon dioxide, the impact you got from using it, when you burn it, you also release that toxic substances in form of gases and also ashes. And most of developing countries don't have that facility to safely contain these toxic ashes. Usually they just bury it around in the same landfill for domestic waste or making some construction material, which is problematic. You don't want to live in a house with toxic bricks, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's just one example. The other would be like asphalt from plastic and many other combinations.
Mm. Yeah, and I noticed like when plastic bottle or a sachet is burned, it's black, right? It's not, like when you burn paper, it's not really like that. But when you burn that, it's black, and the smell is really, noxious. So you really know that it's really it couldn't be healthy. Um Sir Bon, what how does greenwashing manifest in the public sphere, like besides the press releases that they put out, on their websites? Are they actively, like, actually advertising this? Are they putting out like maybe videos on popular media or on social media to reinforce their promises or their claims?
Yes, I mean, there's numerous manifestations and numerous forms
Mm-hmm.
by which many of these greenwashing attempts are conducted by companies. Probably, as I mentioned earlier, one of the shall we say examples of uh, how they've duped the public uh, for a long time is the idea that consumers are responsible for the plastic waste or the waste
Yeah.
problem, right? Through their campaigns, for example, so it's not just advertising campaigns, but for example, X company supports a cleanup drive, or there's the so-called clean and green initiatives, which are
Oh,
very nice sounding, right? And who wouldn't want to be involved in the cleanup, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
With a company supporting cleanups on an annual basis, you'd think, that they're doing their share for the environment, but actually, they're the ones primarily responsible for creating that pollution in the first place, and to be able to continue dispensing throwaway plastic, they hide behind this veneer that they are cleanup champions. And the cleanup activity itself conveys the notion that individuals or consumers are responsible for the problem because we've littered the place with all this plastic. When in fact, even if you've collected them and you put them in the right receptacles or waste bins, they would still be creating all this impacts on the environment down the line through the years, right? And even with the best intentions of recycling, we have to understand, right, that the recycling plastic has limitations. You can only recycle certain materials for maybe a few cycles, but ultimately they will still end up as waste,
Yeah.
and they will break down into microplastics. And given that many of the chemicals that Yobel mentioned are implicated, in the production of plastics, they have long-term and profound effects on the reproduction, on the endocrine system. So
Oh,
you cannot discount, the long-term implications of just putting out plastics, more plastics into the system, and thinking that by recycling you're solving the problem. You're not. As we say, recycling has a role in addressing the crisis, but I think companies have to look further upstream. They have to look at ways to reduce and come up with alternative systems that do not rely on disposable packaging. So sorry that that is a long answer to your question of
not okay.
how how they're promoting. So that's one. It's not it's through cleanup, promoting cleanup drives. Others would be advertising. In fact, in many places, some of these companies are being challenged in court for false advertising claims when they say, for example, that this stuff will be recycled. That chasing arrow symbol is one of the biggest scams that's been foisted on the public for a long time, right? Supposedly, it's meant to identify what kind of resin the
Yeah,
material is made of, right? But because it's like chasing arrows, the industry has used that, and companies have been using that to suggest that this is going to be recycled, right?
recyclable. Yeah.
When in fact they're not going to any proper recycling facility. So it's a shame. It's really a shame, and a lot of people fall for it. For the longest time, in celebration of Earth Days in the past, even many environmental groups have fallen for this. Even when I was starting as an environmental activist,
Interesting.
I thought that this was a good thing. But then realizing that actually it was all an attempt to engineer the mindset of the public, to believe that,
Wow.
uh, you know, to deepen our reliance on this material and to believe that, it's all being managed properly.
And that it's okay.
And that it's okay, because it alleviates consumer guilt. If you buy a
Yeah,
piece of plastic, you see, oh, there's this symbol, must be good. I just put it in the right receptacle. So that's a blatant falsehood, and deserves to be made transparent. That this is a lie
mm,
that's being foisted on the public.
yeah. Along that line, how can the public push back against that narrative that the consumers are to blame? And how can they hold the companies more responsible or more accountable for the amount of plastic packaging that is produced and end up in their hands eventually?
Right. So in Breaking from Plastic, we've been doing what we call brand audits for like 3 years in a row now, and the reason we pioneered this tactic together with Gaia and together with our allies in the movement like Greenpeace is because we wanted to really put the spotlight on the companies responsible for producing the stuff, right? Because year in, year out, there's cleanups being done, but the problem is not being abated. The trash just keeps piling up. As they say, you have to uh, uh, shut the tap off instead of dealing with it. Bucket by bucket at the back end. So we did the brand audits to really plot what do you call count our volunteers count and actually plot the uh, most polluting brands that we find in this cleanup activities. And so you have the top companies, Coke, Pepsi, Nestle, Unilever, consistently landing in the top 10 plastic polluters. And that's not just in Asia, that's global, that's worldwide, which also is a testament to, the power of their advertising, right? That they're able to
Yeah.
sell all these products all over the place, but not having to deal with the consequences and passing the responsibility off to local governments or consumers.
After 3 years, what's been the impact of that? I mean, from me, from a news point of what standpoint is that I've seen how these audits have actually prompted the companies to respond publicly about the claims. But from your
Yeah.
end, how's
Yes. At least it's compelling the companies to respond and explain also to media and to the public what they're doing about the problem. Even the CEO of Unilever was quoted in one public forum saying that they have to get rid of sachets, right? Because they don't want to be in the branded litter business, right? That's not their core business. But most of the responses we get from the top polluters are typically still, focused or fixated on recycling. Right? They say they will boost their recycling efforts. They will come up with partnerships with local government units to collect, like in Indonesia. Yobel could talk about the waste banks that these companies are supporting, supposedly to where citizens can deposit their sachets in exchange maybe for a pack of noodles,
Plastic
again packaged
packaging.
in disposable plastic. In Manila, they have the same program. Where they collect the waste, and then in exchange they're given again maybe a fee or a pack of noodles. uh, but where the question is, where do the plastics collected go? Right, so
Oh
we know that
yeah.
they're being sent to cement companies or cement kilns for burning, or
Ah,
probably they're processed into something else, like eco bricks, or maybe made as part fodder for plastic to roads. This type of efforts, keeping in mind that ultimately, as I've said, the problem does not end there, right? Because ultimately, when you burn them, then you convert this into toxic emissions and carbon emissions, bad for the host community and for the planet. And if you convert them into other or downcycle them into other products, they
mm,
will eventually break down into microplastics and come back to us via the food chain or via air
ah,
emissions. That's
mm.
why many anthropologists are calling this age that we live in as the age of plastic, right? The plastic age.
Oh.
It's everywhere, like you said in the beginning.
It is everywhere, yeah, especially now. Yobel, can you just respond also to the same question, like how do you think can the public push back more? Besides, besides or the organized movements like Gaia and BFFP and Greenpeace, how can the anyone just push back against this and call out these corporations for putting the blame on consumers instead of being more accountable and taking responsibility.
Right. So one thing that we need to understand is that this won't be solved by individual action. And that's how the industry portrays the solution. Like, you need to do the cleanup, you need to do the recycling. But that's not it. If you want to make your individual efforts stack up, you must aim for the systemic change. So you need to do either campaigning or advocating, or it's more on like following the trend of being or living zero waste lifestyle. But this is not a trend. This is a need for us to survive. And on the other hand, I think we have this citizen muscle, that we are the one that have the voice to make the policy right. And therefore, I will encourage everyone here to raise your voice to your policymaker. For example, one absurd thing happened, I think 2 years ago in Indonesia. We
Mm.
have this new regulation on plastic reduction, which is great. It's not that ambitious, but it's a really good step. But at the same time, the national government incentivizes petrochemical industry, one of the biggest one here, with 25-year holiday tax or tax holiday.
Oh wow.
So that's inconsistent, and that's the problem. Like, you're promoting, let's go, let's recycle, let's do this with the waste bank where you collect it and you get some bits of money, and you still produce and incentivize a lot of your money to this big polluter. Not only the FMCGs, but also the petrochemical industry. So in that sense, I think we need to see plastic problem not only as a waste problem or environmental problem, but see it as a what's the word, like an existential crisis where everyone with every expertise should play the role. Because in my place, and I believe that's the same with Philippines, a lot of waste picker and waste worker health are compromised because there is no good collection system. Waste are being burned, especially plastic, and they are paid very low in price or fee, so
Mm.
they don't have that quality of life. While we in the urban city feel like we have done the job, as the industry said or suggested. right? So maybe that's how I can encourage people to do more systematic change.
Mm-hmm. And you talked about policy and law. I imagine that in Indonesia and also in the Philippines, there are there enough laws on this to actually for solid waste management? I would think there is, right? It's a matter of enforcement and compliance.
Yeah, there is some good example in Indonesia. The government has this roadmap and oblige corporate to phase out sachet by 2030. But the question is it fast enough? And how it is going to be implemented? Because usually the national law is like a mandate, but when we talk about the capacity of local government, it's a totally different situation. Maybe they don't have the staff, the expertise, the budget. So it's a good way. It seems moving to the right direction. But the question would be, is it with the right speed that we are having this deadline? For the carbon budget, for the plastic pollution, especially in the ocean. So yeah, that's one way. And the other thing, I feel like um, we need to take a step back and really understand that the government cannot do this by themselves. Civil society need not only to demand and urge protest, but also contribute in any way possible to help this local government, especially, to execute the program, execute the plan, and even develop a more ambitious plan. So this is a collective process. Instead of blaming and naming between citizen and government, we should blame the corporation, but we should help the government. So we will have a more productive, system at the end of the journey.
Yeah, and proactive too for everyone. Sir, what can you please address the same question? But do
Yeah.
we have enough laws? Yeah.
Not enough, unfortunately. I mean, we have a good foundational laws to begin with. Like here in the Philippines, you have the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act, right, which supposedly mandates interventions at the front end of the problem, organizing and educating communities, involving them in waste segregation, right? And in our best examples where this is applied, we know that there is consistently a residual fraction of the waste, that needs to be dealt with, that needs to be diverted away from landfills or end up or they end up in incinerators, which anyway in the Philippines should be theoretically banned, right, under the Clean Air Act. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so it's not enough, right? So that's why many groups in the Philippines, particularly our allies in Break Free from Plastic, have been pushing for a national ban to phase out single-use plastics, which
Right.
comprise
Yeah.
the majority or the dominant fraction of this residual waste stream, and I'm sure that industry will not take that, sitting down. In fact, when we proposed this inclusion of sachets in such a phase-out law in the Senate, we know that the industry response, as articulated by politicians there, they have influence with or over. They're saying that it's only a matter of recycling them, properly collecting and recycling them. Again, fixating on this false promise of recycling, when in fact they should be looking at ways to reduce their plastic footprint and coming up with alternative systems. It's the easy response for them, right? It's like a default response, recycling. But we know that you know the planet can ill afford to, let's say, have more plastics than fish in the oceans by 2050, based on current projections. So
Yeah.
there has to be greater commitment to reduce the production of plastics. And by the way, one of the reasons why recycling is not so successful is because recycled plastic cannot compete with virgin plastic, which is cheaper at current moment because of overproduction, and also given the impacts of pandemic on petrochemical industrial expansion. So industry itself is undermining the solution that it promises will solve the problem, right? So this is absurd, and they keep harping on recycling. Unfortunately, if there's policy intervention that's needed, it's a phase out of all those disposable plastics, and also extended producer responsibility, right? Putting the responsibility of the manufacturer beyond the point of sale, meaning to say throughout the life cycle of the product, not just the product, but the material and the packaging by which they dispense those products. And we have to be careful though, because we've seen in Europe, in many other places where extended producer responsibility has been again hijacked by industry to say, okay, we'll take responsibility, we'll take care of the problem, but in their own terms, meaning burning or shipping them to other countries in Africa or in Asia, for example. That's the example we've seen in Europe recently. So we have to be careful that uh, because they're very good at appropriating, misusing all these concepts to justify business as usual.
Mm-hmm.
Even this new talk about the circular economy, you can bet, that recycling will be again, from their standpoint, the centerpiece of what they mean by circular economy, which should not be the case.
Yeah. Well, this has been such an enriching conversation from my end too. As a journalist, I've been learning a lot. We'll just pause for a bit and come back. This has been the first um, BFFP Gaia Fellowship deep dive on the YTL podcast. We'll be back after a bit. So we've been talking about greenwashing, misleading information we hear from corporations on supposedly green business practices. I want to go back to the point that where we left off on whether policy is enough, whether the law is enough. So, Ron, I wanted to ask if is it a matter of balancing between how do we protect the environment and how do we keep investors here, or how do we keep attracting businessmen here, especially big corporations, big manufacturers, or is that supposed to be a polarity? Yeah, is there supposed to be a polarization there, or how can those two interests meet?
Yes. Well, first of all, laws. It's good if you have progressive policies or legislation in place, and then it becomes a matter of interpretation and implementation as well. And it's in the interpretation sometimes where the problems emerge, particularly when you talk about polarity. Sustainable development is an example of the contending forces between destruction and conservation, and finding a middle ground. Is it possible? It should be possible to be able to do business without uh, necessarily, impacting or damaging the environment. You could tread lightly, you could step lightly. For example, with your zero waste stores, still do business, but without creating longer lasting uh, pollution or impact, right? So, and that is, I think, the crux of the problem is really when it comes to plastics packaging. Uh, the industries and the companies that are implicated as polluters have a heavy footprint at the moment, and they have to look at ways where they can really cut back on that footprint, and really looking at it from a different perspective. Uh, for example, investing in reuse or refill models. You remember in many markets in Asia, I suppose that's also true in Indonesia, in the Philippines, we have beverage containers that came in bottles, right? So milk bottles came in glass. Same with still here in the Philippines, beer comes in glass bottles. So there is still a share of that refillable market, but in many parts of the world, this market for refillables have been totally overtaken by disposables, right? And you've created this disposable economy that's giving rise to a waste crisis and also contributing to the climate crisis. So companies have to be challenged to rethink uh, the ways that they deliver their products to consumers and to the market. So, in a way, lightening that load. I'm not saying it's without impact, but at least lightening the pressure or the load you're putting on the environment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
But
Um,
a lot of this gets lost in the shorthand. When they say recycling, we know basically what they mean is business as usual. So they have to think differently.
mm, I want to now dive into other false solutions. Yobel, can you talk to our listeners about why incineration of plastics is harmful?
Right. So incineration, or maybe we can just say it burning of material, is, well, an old technology. If you look back at our ancient ways of dealing with waste, the Mayans have been burning their waste ever since, like before, thousands of years ago. But the thing, we only change how it looks, like from open burning and into a box, and with a bigger box, adding another box with air pollution controller, and adding more additionalities to the machine. And we call it advanced thermal technology, or incineration, or waste to energy, energy from waste, anything that sounds catchy and technological. But the idea of burning material first is not sustainable because you burn limited resources. Plastic, one of them. But the thing with these limited resources, they contain lots of toxic chemicals. They are extracted from our earth, added with chemicals, and you burn it. And the industry say that it's fairness. It's not fairness. The physics doesn't say that. When you convert one thing into another, it doesn't vanish. It only changes the state
Yeah,
into gas.
yeah.
So that's the law of physics. And when you convert this, you not only convert plastic into CO2, but also all the additives in it. And the worst case about burning plastic is that you produce one of the most toxic substance known by humanity, which is dioxin and furan. So this dioxin and furan has a long-term effect, a chronic effect, not only cancer but also endocrine disruption, and it accumulates. It accumulates not only in the air, but also in the ash. And I've mentioned before, the management of ash is terrible. It's dire. So they can get washed into water, water bodies, and that happened in some East Asian countries. And also, there are systematic approach, to make these ashes captured in bricks. And maybe you have heard a lot of, ideas on how to make plastic into construction material. And that's also the same thing with this toxic ashes. And the thing is, it's when the companies say we have control it with our latest technology, but they don't monitor it. They don't. Even the regulation in Indonesia only oblige dioxide and furan monitoring once every 5 years. That's crazy. And that's also similar with what happened in the Philippines. It's not continual 24-hour. And if they monitor it, they only monitor it on the stack on a certain time, but they don't measure the impact to the local community or the environment or the surrounding. So that's a huge problem.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So when you inhale it, it gets into your system, right? And it could, you know, cause you a host of problems. We received a question from one of the fellows, from Doris Lim. Does the emissions from incineration cause, genetic mutations that make your body sick?
I haven't read that study, but maybe Fawn have or have some data. But for sure, when you have this, what's the term, like POPs or organic pollutants, they accumulate and impact at least one is your hormone system, and when your hormone system is disrupted, you have immunity problem, and when you have immunity problem, there's a lot of complications, sickness, and symptoms will attack you. So that's what's obvious, but maybe Fawn can add more on that.
Yeah.
Yes, possible. It's possible, and some of the emissions or toxic substances of concern coming from incinerating plastics are mutagenic, meaning they could, create changes because they affect the endocrine system, they affect the reproductive system. And in particular, there are always, it's not just when you talk about dioxins and furans, it's actually a class of many
Uh,
substances, right? It's not just one, and mostly products of incomplete combustion. And whatever heavy metal you put into the plastic material, you're transforming that into, you're not destroying that
yeah.
substance or that material. You're simply transforming it as a basic law of thermodynamics, right? And in a more uh, in a form that is readily, ingestible or inhalable, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, because just smoke in itself, when you inhale it, you think it you will only damage the lungs, but when you're talking about even more toxic
Yeah, because
substances,
they
yeah,
accumulate in the system, right? So they bioaccumulative, they passed on via breast milk in the case of a mother
yeah,
nursing a child. So it's in studies have shown that many of these chemicals of concern are also transgressing the placental boundaries. So they
wow.
it's and that's the same with microplastics. There was a recent study which showed that microplastics actually also transcend the placental barrier. So a mother would be transferring this toxic load into the baby, onto the child, which is like, tragic, uh, and not even knowing, uh,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that is actually that should have sounded the alarm many years ago for many of these companies to stop, putting all these persistent organic substances in their products, or creating processes or products that will produce many of these substances. But
Mm-hmm.
no,
Can I add
yeah.
a bit more on that? Because we
Sure.
talk of persistent organic pollutant, but that's not the only problem. So if you look at the regulation of air emission worldwide, they only regulate micro-sized particle. But when you burn material in a high temperature, you produce ultra-fine particle in a nano size. That's not regulated, and the smaller the particle is, the longer travel distance it have. So when
Yeah.
you say like, oh, the incinerator is far away, it's in the next province, I'm safe. No, you're not. That's the bad news. You have this maybe 1,000 kilometer of travel distance. And when it got into water bodies and maybe plants, it can bioaccumulate. Maybe the plant will be transported to the next province and you eat that plant. So that's a problem. So
Yes.
right. Ultrafine particle is a huge issue that people rarely talk about. And we have that study from UK with UK Win or United Kingdom with the Incineration Network. They have that study. But also we forget to mention about heavy metals. In plastic, colorants or the thing that add colors to your plastic usually have heavy metals, at least chromium. So this also something that we miss in our regulation perspective on how to monitor, how to measure. So a lot of scientific gaps in our regulation and our technology or capacity to monitor the impact of those, rarely spoken uh, problems.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to go to this. We've been hearing about this, but we don't know. I mean, it's being touted as a sustainable solution, but it is apparently not. This waste to energy process. Um, Yobel, can you explain? Because this is something that's widely used in Japan, but and we hear about that. But why is this not a why is this a false solution?
Right. So maybe we need to define what is sustainable. Sustainable has become like a marketing terminology, like
Yes.
green, eco, and everyone can say that. So sustainability should be looked at the ecological boundaries. Like we are living in this one Earth with limited resources. They have certain capacity to regenerate resources, but if we consume more or destroy more than what the Earth can produce, that's a sustainability problem. Why? Aside from the health aspect and health impact, you are consuming and destroying this valuable material that might generate in thousands of years in one day by burning things. So that's not sustainable practices. And on the other side, burning releasing this lot of greenhouse gases, not only from the the stack of that incineration plant, but also it has implication to the upstream chain because you destroy it, meaning you need to make more of it. And along the chain, you produce more greenhouse gases. Yet we
Yeah.
only have this limited time and cap of carbon, emission. But the sad thing is lots of policymakers, even public, and the industry try to push that, hey, this is a good source of energy. This is WTE, waste to energy. It is a waste of energy. Like you're burning your waste, with extra fuel just to take like a very small percentage of energy from it if you're lucky. So
Mm,
that's a problem. It's not renewable, and they sometimes try to make this like an offset effort to offset the carbon emission from the production. But offsetting doesn't work when you keep producing at the first place. So you offset it by stop the production and then offset
yeah.
it with some kind of technology, but definitely incineration or burning things in any other way is not the answer.
Yeah, I mean, how do we offset the very first piece of plastic bottle produced in I don't know how many years ago? It's still here. It's still on Earth now. So how can you actually offset all of that? And we've, as I said earlier, it's like tons and tons, hundreds of tons of plastic now. There's also this, probably similar to how short term a solution these exercises of cleanup drives, tree planting activities. But we also hear, feature stories. They're actually covered in such glowing manner, like how plastic materials are recycled into bricks, into bags, into chairs that are marketed as, this is part of an effort to somehow um, take back the waste that is created and turn it into something else. But why is this also a false solution? Maybe I can ask that question to both.
Yeah, well, it is problematic, mainly because when these so-called interventions or solutions are being presented as solutions, right? Or and in the process they reinforce the current business model. So,
Ah,
meaning to say, they tend to justify the continuing production of problematic plastic materials. So take plastic to chairs, for example, right? It's well intentioned, or plastic to roads. The people who are behind this, probably they have good intentions in mind. They want to come up with a solution to the problem that's already out there, what we call legacy plastic. So we cannot totally say stop or condemn these initiatives, right? There is good intention behind them, but they have to be aware that these interventions tend to reinforce the current business model, which is, let's just keep producing them, because anyway, uh, we can convert them into chairs, or we can convert them into roads. But
right. Yeah.
even if you pave the entire Philippine and Indonesian archipelagos with plastic roads, it's not going to be enough. There's just too much plastic in the system,
Uh-huh.
and not you're not even uh, keeping in mind how these plastics eventually will be liberated, through use in the form of microplastics or emissions. Uh, And given what we know about the many chemicals used in plastics manufacturing and different kinds of plastics for that matter, heavy metals, other toxic substances, phthalates, persistent substances, and you convert all these materials into school chairs or let's say plastic houses, would you be willing to live or sit, or will you allow your child to sit in a chair when you know all these toxic emissions leaking out of the plastic structure are
Right.
there, right? So there's lack of information, obviously, and we need to marshal the information needed to show that these are merely stopgap measures, right? So because people want to deal with what's out there, but unless we really tackle the root cause of the problem, uh, we will not be able to address it. I mean, recycling will only reinforce more production. That's why we keep saying we have to look at the root cause of the problem. We have to look at how we can reduce, not just how we can recycle more.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let me just go to a question that is timely, because we are marking the first year that we are on lockdown. And since then, a lot of households, a lot of people have resorted to, getting more deliveries, of course, of whatever goods they need, from hygiene products to food. And of course, we've seen, the amount of bubble wrap and plastic that's going into households and going out onto the streets and onto garbage dumps. And of course, on top of that, all the medical waste, because everybody's using masks with plastic components and face shields that are made of plastic. How do you see this pandemic affecting the crisis even further?
I can take that question. We've seen, and it's true, since the pandemic started, there's been a spike in the use of PPEs, disposable masks, and PPEs in many places, and correspondingly an increase in medical waste. Right. There's also increase in delivery or takeout. Containers mostly made of disposables. And mind you, the plastics industry took advantage of the pandemic in the early months, to say that the disposable plastics is essential for uh, safeguarding public health, right? Even if when the science showed later on that it's not via surface transmission that you get the virus, and even if you're talking surface transmission, plastics is probably one of the worst materials because the virus tends to stay in plastic
Yeah.
longer than other materials. But they did take advantage of that to push back on plastic bans in many places. But now we're seeing that the cities who have plans to ban or phase out single-use plastics are back on track. Even Jakarta, even in the middle of pandemic, decided to ban plastic bags, because they were not listening to all these hacks, from industry who wanted to take advantage of the situation. So it is a problem, but the solution is again um, also to think that we should be able to protect our health, the health of our families, our communities, without creating damage to the environment through the use of reusable masks, right, or reusable PPEs, which have been proven to be as effective than as
Basically.
disposable masks. And maybe in certain situations, the healthcare sector that would require the use of, let's say, the disposable, what do you call, N95 mask, that should be fine. But for most of us who are just in the house or doing uh, going to the market, we can use reusable masks.
Yeah.
Imagine if everyone were using disposable masks. That's like a trillion masks a day, right?
Right. Right.
Where's that all going to end up? So we need to again, yeah, push reusables even this time of
I
crisis.
mean, not to mention the vaccines, which come, of course, in, again, it's made of plastic, but I don't know an alternative way to inoculate people with, I don't know how
Yeah,
to.
they're saying it's possible to do this orally at some point
Oh, okay,
as
that
well.
would be. Yeah, Yobel, do you wanna share or respond to the same question?
Yeah, I felt like the problem is we are not ready with dealing with crisis. Even without the pandemic and the
Wow.
surging lot of PPEs, we have relatively low waste collection system, and that's only for the domestic waste. Now we are talking about the hazardous or potentially infectious waste, and the system is not there. So looking at from the government perspective, they are not ready. So from the consumer or citizens perspective, we have not many options. But Fon have said it brilliantly, like we have that reusable options, and it actually encourages local economy. I've been knowing some friends of mine that produce this from
Reusable plastic.
leftover fabric and put layers on it, sell it. It's kind of building the local economy, but we need to make this at scale. So if this can be applied in the pandemic situation, imagine if we are going towards recovery, that reusable is possible, and it's happening right now, even with the worst situation ever. Banning plastic is one way, but I think and I believe reuse businesses are on the rise. I've seen a lot more zero waste refill box stores in the pandemic session compared to 2 or 3 years ago. And
Mm,
we Gaia covered it in our report, which is business unusual, and most of them are from Philippines. You have brilliant, amazing initiative. Even we have this tough financial situation, but people are willing to go there. The question is, are we ready to scale it up and make it as a system? That will be the next homework.
yeah, this brings me to this reminds me of the zero waste cities that, of course, me and my fellow fellows learned about during the pandemic. Sorry, no pandemic, the fellowship in Penang. I mean, you have the business unusual coupled with zero waste cities. What's the role of these, positive examples in this entire campaign against plastics, and how useful is it to reinforce that something can be done?
I think it's a matter of showing that it is doable and it's happening. But to scale everything up, you need public support and government support. You
Right.
need incentive. You don't throw your money away to this polluting petrochemical industry with 25-year holiday tax, but you give
Yeah.
incentive to this new technology, and it's doable. We see a lot of countries now invest more in lithium ion technology to make renewable energy more accessible as in the storage system. It's
Mm,
happening, and it's happening fast. So that means we can do the same thing with small business initiatives. And I see this as a way to recover faster and better in this pandemic situation, because it creates local jobs, better jobs,
yeah.
and it's better for everyone and the environment. So why not? But as long as these big companies are incentivized, these local businesses don't have the capacity to compete with that mass-produced centralized system. So this
Mm,
is like, there is a huge gap. There is a emerging initiative, but we don't remove the cap or the limit for this first level or first stage to go beyond this current situation of refillable and reusable system.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, Ron, perhaps you could address the same question.
Yeah, well, this is where, of course, not just creativity but also political will and leadership come in, right? Because as we've seen, we have good model policies in the Philippines. We actually have good models of zero waste communities. We've gone beyond this stage of model building, right? It's really just waiting to be scaled up, and along with it, the solutions, right? And but this is where political support's important, and the main barrier, one of the main barriers to the scaling up of alternatives and solutions is let's face it, it's incompetence, one thing, and the other is corruption, right? Mainly because there's so many uh, what you call rent seekers, right, in the system, who'd rather, maintain the status quo because they benefit out of it, and that includes um, local government officials, not all, uh, who benefit from, waste collection, the current waste collection, and the fixation on centralized waste management facilities, including this waste to energy
Yeah,
thing that's now being promoted
yeah,
aggressively. So
yeah.
we have to, and the only way to combat that is really with greater transparency. We need to demand transparency from our leaders, from our officials, so that the level of corruption uh, goes down, and with it, also the public accountability increases. Right.
Mm.
So that's what activism is about. Unfortunately, in many places, including in the Philippines, activism is under threat. You know, so
Yes.
again, making it more difficult for groups who are advocating systemic change
Yeah, I actually want.
of a non-violent nature. I have to
Yeah,
emphasize,
I
right?
actually wanted to touch on that later, but since you already are talking about it, this is of course a difficult road. Like user one, you've been here for over 20 years, and the problem just keeps on increasing. Um, what keeps you doing it? Like, I mean, it takes a massive amount of effort. And do you feel that people are listening at all?
Yes, it does take a lot of effort and a lot of stamina and staying power. But many of us continue to invest in this because we are seeing the gains, of the alternatives that we're pushing for at the community level, for example, or when a zero waste store comes up, it validates, it validates what we're saying around alternatives, or about how we can still, conduct ourselves or implement projects that serve both the local environment and also the local economy and the welfare of the community. So that's very inspiring. These are very inspiring, and it validates. But at the same time, we know that we are up against
Yeah,
gargantuan forces, possible collusion also between government and industry. We have to break that. There's also good industry players, there's good government officials, so we have to work with them. And we have to, as we keep saying, I mean, we've been in this fight for quite a long time. We have to make sure that the environment is given prominence in electoral battles.
right.
Electing leaders who believe in the way, or who understand how the earth functions. Right? We cannot be electing charlatans or pretenders uh, in these positions of power, and then we have to deal with their ignorance later on. Right? This is
Yeah,
this is the situation we find ourselves in, uh, unfortunately, in many
yeah.
parts of the world.
A lot of our problems are rooted in ignorance. So, yeah, Yobel, who's a little bit, on the younger side, a bit newer, but his story, of course, is rooted in a tragedy, and that moved him to get into this. So, Yoba, what drives you to keep on doing this despite what's your wanted as a gargantuan challenge?
I think
Well,
Yobel
it is a
may have.
gargantuan challenge. It's a hard decision to really invest. Hello? Right. I
Yeah,
think I'm back.
yeah.
So
Mhm.
indeed, it's a gargantuan problem. It's a humongous one, and it's really tiring for me, especially as young people, to know that my life has a deadline. Like 10 years now, if we don't do this and that, you might extinct. And you may not, marry, have a child, have happy life that
Oh
every
my
books, right?
God.
That's a huge pressure, right? And as you mentioned, I saw this injustice, when I first visited the landfill in Indonesia,
Mm,
and lots of people are suffering. Could be because of me putting something in my bin and throw it away, which is their home. And it accumulates and echo with me that this is not only, problem of cleanliness, as many people may have perceived. This is a systemic problem with justice, with health, and maybe with gender in some places. And
mhm,
I shared that, I need to do something, even the smallest role. And the other side, I also felt this, a lot of our brilliant minds are recruited by these big companies. They have the money, so they are recruited there. But the
right.
good thing is we, the common people, have the will. And imagine this wheel, a collective wheel, as a colony of bees or ants that can defeat bigger animals or monsters when we mobilize in the right way. So looking at that potential, I felt like we can beat this game. We can beat this, existential threat by organizing in the right way, tapping into the right resources, even though it's limited. But when you tap it in the right place, right moment, with the right network, you can win this game. And that's, I think, where BFFP and Gaia play the role to really, mobilize this global network and take
Mm,
right action simultaneously in different part of the world.
yeah. I mean, I don't know how you do what you guys do. It's such a such a tough job that has, but big, impact, of course, on the world. Let me just move on to why recycling is not enough. We, of course, this has been a buzzword since I was in elementary, high school in the 90s. But why is this not enough to address the this problem? Maybe Yobel, you can take this first.
Sure. Aside from the plastic production that's quadruple in the next 40 years, the thing is our recycling rate, the current recycling rate is around 9%. UNEP said that 9%, and even for us to increase 1%, it's a hard job. In
Mm,
Indonesia, the recycling industry is centralized in one big island, the Java Island. While we have lots of other big islands like Borneo, Sumatra, they don't have that recycling facility. And
mm,
when I heard, like for example, Danone, they said, "Hi, we will make this 100% RPET, and we will collect the waste, collaborate with Waste Bank across the islands." It doesn't make sense because you're taking the plastic waste, for example, from the eastern part of Indonesia, take it to Java, and then recycle it into another single-use plastic, or maybe not single-use, but at the end, it doesn't make sense. The logistic doesn't make sense. The money doesn't make sense. And also a special case that we need to take note is that our collection rate is very low if you compare it to developed country. So that's another huge homework to do. And this
mm,
recycling technology is whatever the technology, they depend on a good segregated collection system. And that's not here yet. We are working on it together with government. So recycling is having a serious problem only from the logistical side. And one said, the oil price is, they are competing with oil price, virgin plastic price. And that makes, this is a nonsense. We cannot do this. The market is not ready. The infrastructure is not ready. And you sell it as the silver bullet. It's not. It won't solve it.
mm-hmm. Sir Vaughn?
Yes, in addition to what Yobel mentioned, we are talking about mechanical recycling, right? Not chemical recycling, because chemical recycling is, for example, waste to energy, converting
Right.
plastics
Yes.
into fuel, which you burn later. So that's tragic for the planet, talking about climate emissions, and not mentioning super expensive, right? So yeah, the track record is not very encouraging. Less than 10% recycling since the 1950s, and even with that small percentage, what we can consider effective recycling is only about 4%, 3 to 4%. Effective recycling or real recycling means being able to recycle the material into the same material with the same quality, right? The same bottle to bottle, for example, because what the industry classifies as recycling these days means downcycling, right? You produce other inferior products from the same material, and keep in mind that recycling is a temporary intervention because ultimately the destination of the recycled material is still the waste bin or the landfill or the oceans uh, or the incinerator for that matter. So you're merely suspending the inevitable. And that is why it cannot be enough, right? It is a good measure, especially if you design your material or your product from the beginning, where you remove the toxics, you come up with maybe uniform standards. So whatever product you're dispensing, it's easier to recycle in a proper way, in an environmentally safe way. So it that has a role, and that needs to improve. But many of the initiatives being promoted as recycling these days are really not what you would call real recycling, and that is why the focus should be on how we reduce our plastic and carbon footprint. Reduction could be achieved by investing in reuse systems or refillable systems, what we call alternative delivery systems, and they have been in place before, right? It's just that the disposable economy has completely consumed, you know, uh, the markets for refillables in many places. And they need
Yeah.
to be brought back. And that requires, again, a set of policy incentives and also demand from consumers for better and more sustainable systems on the part of companies. Like
Yeah.
the deposit and return schemes, right? We used to have that. Where you're able to return a bottle that proved to be very effective in
Yeah.
capturing all the, and you need to rewash and then deploy it back to the marketplace. Uh, but the same companies who are advocating recycling or better collection, including Danone or Coke, for that matter, these are the same companies who have been opposing the return of deposit and returns schemes in other parts of the world. So again, you see, you see contradiction, and in a way, yeah, for the sake of image, perhaps they do these things.
No, I remember when I was much younger, when I was a kid, this was like the standard. When you're going to buy a soft drink or beer, you pay a deposit and then you get it back once you return the bottles. And of course, the sellers, the company, they collect it and like you said, wash it. But now it's in the sari sari store in our little tindahans. It's not really that much, used anymore, and some just unfortunately put it in a small plastic with straw and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, from the little practices that we tend to forget, it could have a major
But
impact.
that's because industry itself has shifted to disposables. That's the reason why what used to be a working sustainable model is now you know being thrown out the window.
Yeah. Mm. Which brings me to one of my final questions. What is the solution actually? What is the solution to this major, like Yobel said, is existential problem? Yobel?
I, yeah, I think one we are already working on it in Gaia with our network. We are developing zero waste cities, not only in Europe. We also have lots of in Asia. We have in Indonesia, in
Yes.
Philippines,
Philippines. Yeah.
Malaysia, and yeah, you know that. So
Yeah.
it's a working model and it's scaling up, but we need to make it faster. Zero waste solution is basically you prevent as much waste as possible, and we have this ideal world of no material is wasted. But if you look at the current, waste hierarchy promoted by the industry, they still have some compromise, a big one actually, with incineration, chemical recycling, part of their hierarchy of priority on how to handle waste. But in our zero waste, hierarchy, incineration, chemical recycling, plastic to fuel is not part of it. We call it unacceptable. So that's what really differentiate our zero waste business model with the other, solution that proposed by, for example, Project Stop by Alliance of Plastic Waste. They promote this, collection for recycling, and it ends there. They don't speak about the reuse, the repair, and the other thing. And why it's a solution? Because it's a local, decentralized system, meaning we engage with local people and we give them better jobs. And or in our recent jobs, recent report, we have this data that incineration per 10,000 ton of waste only result in one or two staff or job. Um, and
Mhm.
if we look higher in like reuse, we have much more jobs created, sustainable, local, strengthening the economy, helping us to go beyond, just recovering.
Mhm. Sir Bon?
Yes, thank you. I'm sounding like a bit of a broken record here already, talking about reduction, right, as the main solution or intervention that is required here. But when I say reduction, I don't mean it only at the individual level, right, where you reduce your the waste that you produce, but really applying the principle of reduction across the entire plastics value chain, right? So from production of the materials and the chemicals used to manufacture plastic, really stopping or capping plastic production, making it more expensive to produce virgin plastic. There should be like a carbon tax attached to it, right? So that that in turn would also compel industries to recycle better, right? Because it becomes more expensive to source their material from virgin plastic. So reduction could also be applied at the consumption side of the equation, right? So through the use of, like we were talking about, alternative, refillable or reuse models, and that's where consumers can really demand a change in the way their products are delivered to them or to the market. And then in the end, there should be less of these materials ending up in the environment, or ending up being burned in incinerators or being dumped in landfills or dump sites. So applying the principle of reduction and really putting the onus back to manufacturers and producers. That we feel is the ultimate solution
Yes.
towards reversing this crisis.
Yeah.
Can I just add a little bit more? I missed something. When other solutions are really focused on plastic, zero waste is also work with the other material, which 50% of it are organic waste. We are dealing with it, and it's a huge problem because it really is not only methane emission, but also like one third of the food are lost in their way of process, transportation and everything, and it ended up into organic waste. What I'm seeing by the industry, they are really focusing on this plastic waste. But zero waste has the spirit of we want to make this cycle of material, not only plastic. Plastic is problematic, but we have lots of other material like metals and also organic waste and the other stuff. So this gives us a more comprehensive look that we are working not only to solve waste problem, but also to repair our broken economy system with a
Mm.
decentralized where people are invited and be part of it and not blamed for their their practices. So we want to make this social justice happening not only to solve the plastic pollution problem. So maybe that's another thing that I really need to state here.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Yobel and Servon. It has been such an enlightening conversation about the plastics problem. Like Yobel said, it's an existential threat, and Servon said, we should put back the onus on the producers and the big corporations. Of course, consumers have a role in minimizing their use, but inevitably, it's those who make it and those who market it that should be taking a chunk of the responsibility and be held accountable for this problem because plastic is toxic. It is a hazard to all of us. We don't know we have microplastics in our food, in the air, in the water that we drink. And so we must do something now, and we must listen and understand this problem. We should not stand idly by. This is a real threat to all of us. It's a scary thing, but we have to really do something about it. Thank you again, Yoel and Sir Von, and to Gaia and BFFP for this very um, interesting and very thought provoking session today. To our listeners, thanks for joining us, and I hope you tune in again next time. For those in Laguna, the show airs every Monday on 103.1 Edge Radio at 7:30 p.m. with replays on Thursdays at the same time. And for the podcast, new episodes are released on Mondays. Please follow and stream the show and share with your friends because people have to know about this crisis. We need to work together to fight the plastics problem as much as we need to fight fake news and disinformation. You may access the YTL podcast via Spotify, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, and Anchor FM. And of course, you can listen for free on all of these platforms. Until next time, thanks again for listening to YTL, your podcast